There are moments in life when a single sentence can reveal the entire truth of a relationship. When words spoken in jest cut deeper than any blade, exposing not humor, but character. This is a story about one such moment, when a man's cruelty became his undoing, and a woman's silence became her greatest weapon. Picture this. A crowded room filled with family, laughter bouncing off expensive walls, crystal glasses catching the light. And in the center of it all, a husband turning to his wife and delivering an insult so cutting, so public, that the air itself seemed to freeze. He called her worthless. He mocked her body. He made her the punchline of a joke that wasn't funny to anyone except those who needed to curry his favor. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the woman he just humiliated owned the very ground his family's legacy was built on. She had just signed papers that morning, making her the majority owner of the corporation his father had dedicated his entire life to serving. The question isn't what she did in that moment. The question is, what would you do when you hold all the power, but the person who hurt you doesn't know it yet? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marriage, they say, is built on foundations of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. But what happens when those foundations are revealed to be nothing more than illusions? When one person is building an empire while the other assumes they're barely surviving. Elena had spent 7 years in this marriage. 7 years of encouraging words when his business deals fell through. 7 years of quiet nights spent coding, designing, strategizing, building something from nothing while he slept soundly, convinced she was wasting time on a hobby. She had celebrated his small victories as if they were monumental. He had dismissed her achievements as luck. The gathering that night was meant to celebrate his father's retirement from Cinecorp, a tech conglomerate that had defined their family name for generations. The dining room was filled with relatives who spoke in loud voices about legacy and achievement, about the importance of family and tradition. Elena sat at the far end of the table, politely smiling, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. She had grown accustomed to being background scenery in her own life. The invisible wife. The one who was tolerated but never truly seen. What none of them knew was that earlier that day, in a boardroom 3 miles away, she had finalized the acquisition that changed everything. Her company, the one her husband called that little project, had just absorbed Cinecorp in a merger worth billions. The insult came during dessert. Perhaps it was the wine talking, or perhaps it was simply who he'd always been. The mask had just finally slipped completely. He leaned back in his chair, gesture sweeping, voice carrying across the table. "You know what Elena's problem is," he announced to the room. "She thinks running a website makes her a businesswoman." The table's laughter was nervous, uncertain. His father chuckled, trying to ease the tension. His mother looked away. But he wasn't finished. "Look at her," he continued, his eyes cold despite the smile on his face. "She's let herself go. Fat, frumpy, and delusional. I keep telling her to hit the gym instead of that computer. But does she listen?" Silence fell like a curtain. Elena's hand stopped moving. The wine glass sat untouched. She didn't react, not with tears, not with anger, not with defense. She simply looked at him with the kind of clarity that comes when you finally see someone for exactly who they are. She excused herself quietly, gathering her purse with hands that didn't shake. No one stopped her. No one followed. That was the moment she understood. She had been performing in a play where she was the only one who believed the script was real. Outside, the night air felt like awakening. Her phone buzzed with a message from her attorney. "Congratulations. Papers are signed. You're now the primary stakeholder. Press release scheduled for morning." Elena stood under the streetlight, watching her reflection in her car window. The woman staring back looked tired, yes, worn down by years of emotional labor. But beneath that exhaustion, something else was emerging, something that had been there all along, waiting. If you're still watching, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you powerful stories every week. She remembered their beginning, the tiny apartment where they'd started. Him, full of big dreams and bigger promises. Her, working 2 jobs while taking night classes in computer science. He told her once, with complete sincerity. Don't worry about working so hard. Once I make it big, you can relax. She had smiled then, not telling him about the prototype she was developing, the software that would eventually revolutionize data security for healthcare systems, the idea that would become her first patent, her first investor meeting, her first $1 million contract. She'd hidden her success not out of shame, but out of love, the misguided belief that a man's ego was more important than a woman's achievement, that making him feel needed was more valuable than being honest about her own capabilities. Every late night she'd claimed was insomnia was actually another round of negotiations with venture capitalists. Every headache that kept her home was really a board meeting held via video call. She'd built an empire in the shadows of their marriage, and he'd never noticed because he'd never bothered to look. The drive home felt longer than usual. The mansion they shared, that she had purchased with her own money, though his name was on the deed too, loomed against the dark sky. Half the lights were off. His car was gone. Inside, the silence was absolute. On the kitchen counter, she found a note scrawled in his handwriting. Staying at Marcus's place tonight. Need space to think. Space to think. Or space to see the woman he'd been texting for months. Elena had known about the affair for longer than he realized. She'd seen the receipts for jewelry she'd never received, the hotel charges for cities he'd supposedly visited for business. She'd said nothing then because she was still deciding, still calculating, still planning. Now, standing in their empty kitchen, she made her choice. The morning arrived with unusual quietness. Elena woke not in their bed, but on the living room couch, her laptop still open beside her. She'd spent hours the night before reviewing contracts, sending emails, making decisions that would ripple through thousands of lives. Her phone was exploding with notifications, text messages from colleagues, emails from business partners, news alerts all carrying variations of the same headline. Anonymous tech founder revealed, Elena Morrison now controls CHINENYE Empire. The press release had gone live at 6 a.m., just as she'd instructed. By 7, every major business outlet was running the story. By 8, her face was on the morning news. She showered slowly, deliberately, chose a navy suit that made her feel like armor, applied makeup not to hide, but to frame her features with intention. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the woman her husband had mocked. She saw the CEO who had outmaneuvered every competitor in her industry. The call came while she was drinking her coffee, his number flashing on the screen. She let it ring 4 times before answering, her voice calm. Good morning. Elena. His voice was strangled, desperate. Elena, what the hell is going on? The news is saying, they're saying you own CHINENYE. Yes. The merger finalized yesterday. Silence stretched between them like an ocean. You never told me. You never asked, she replied simply. You assumed my work was insignificant. I let you believe that because it was easier than arguing. My father, he stammered. His job, his position, is secure, she interrupted. I'm not cruel. I'm just done being invisible. She could hear him breathing, could almost picture him pacing, running his hands through his hair the way he did when reality refused to match his expectations. We need to talk, he finally said, face to face. This is insane. You can't just. I can, Elena said quietly. And I did. The papers you had me sign last month, the ones you said were routine account transfers, I had my attorney review them first. They were divorce papers buried in financial jargon. You tried to take everything while I was at my weakest. His silence confirmed everything. So I signed them, she continued, because I wanted out too. The difference is, I actually earned what I have. You were trying to steal it. Elena, wait. The divorce is final. The assets are divided according to what each of us brought into the marriage. Since the house, the cars, the investments were all purchased with my income. Income you claimed didn't exist. They remain mine. You'll receive what the law requires, nothing more. You're really doing this? After everything we've been through? Her laugh was soft, sad. Everything we've been through? You mean the years I spent making myself smaller, so you could feel bigger? The nights you came home smelling like someone else's perfume? The casual cruelty you delivered like it was affection. I made mistakes. You made choices, she corrected. And so did I. I chose to build something meaningful. You chose to tear me down. We're both living with the consequences now. She ended the call before he could respond. Her hands were steady. Her heart was quiet. The following weeks moved like a dream sequence. Elena returned to her company headquarters, not as the anonymous founder, but as the visible leader. Her staff greeted her with standing ovations. The press requested interviews that she granted selectively, speaking not about revenge, but about resilience. She restructured Corp with surgical precision. The toxic departments were dissolved. New leadership emerged, women and men who understood that innovation required diversity of thought. Her father-in-law kept his advisory role, though they both understood the power dynamic had irreversibly shifted. She never spoke publicly about her ex-husband. When journalists tried to bait her with questions about him, she simply smiled and redirected to business matters. His story told itself without her help. He'd moved in with his mistress, who left him within a month when she realized his family wealth had been an illusion. His friends, who'd laughed at his jokes, stopped returning his calls when they understood he had nothing to offer them. His father, faced with the reality that the woman he'd dismissed now controlled his legacy, couldn't look her in the eye at company functions. But Elena's victory wasn't measured in his downfall. It was measured in the women who reached out to her, sharing their own stories of hidden strength. The emails from wives who'd been told their dreams were hobbies. The messages from daughters whose fathers had underestimated them. The letters from strangers who saw in her story a permission slip to stop shrinking. She established a foundation called Unseen, dedicated to funding women entrepreneurs whose work had been dismissed. The grant applications poured in by the thousands, proof that her story wasn't unique, just uniquely visible. One evening, 6 months after that dinner party, Elena stood in her office overlooking the city. The same skyline that had witnessed her breaking now reflected her rebuilding. Her mother called, voice warm with pride. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Elena considered the question. She thought about the weight she'd lost, not from her body, but from her spirit. The lightness that came from no longer carrying someone else's insecurity, as if it were her own responsibility. "I feel free," she answered honestly. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, when you were little, you used to say you wanted to be invisible. You thought it would make life easier." "I remember. But you were never meant for invisibility, my love. You were meant to shine so brightly that others couldn't help but see themselves clearly in your reflection." After they hung up, Elena returned to the window. She thought about the woman she'd been, the one who believed love required diminishment. She thought about the man who'd never bothered to know her, and she realized that the greatest gift he'd given her was the final insult that made her walk away. Some people teach us how to love. Others teach us what we'll no longer accept. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold. But Elena discovered something more profound, that true power isn't found in retribution, but in the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by those who failed to see it. Her ex-husband eventually found work at a competitor's firm, a middle management position that paid a fraction of what he'd once felt entitled to. She heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd told people she'd ruined his life. She never responded. His narrative wasn't her responsibility to correct. The last time Elena saw him was at an industry conference 2 years later. He looked older, grayer, diminished by the weight of consequences he'd never anticipated. Their eyes met across the crowded convention hall. She nodded politely, the way you acknowledge any former acquaintance, and turned back to the keynote speaker she was introducing. In that brief exchange, everything was said. The past acknowledged, the present accepted, the future diverged into paths that would never again intersect. That night, as Elena delivered her speech about innovation and resilience, about the importance of building systems that value all voices, she caught her reflection in the teleprompter glass. The woman staring back was heavier than she'd been at that dinner party. Not in body, but in presence. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd walked through fire and emerged refined rather than destroyed. The audience rose in ovation. Cameras flashed. But the moment that mattered most was the text message she received after stepping off stage. It was from a young woman she'd mentored, sharing news of her first major contract. "Thank you for showing me that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage," the message read, "because they never see you coming until you've already won." Elena smiled, slipping her phone back into her pocket. She thought about the wine glass that had trembled in her hand years ago, the silence that had felt like suffocation, the moment she'd chosen to walk away from applause that rang hollow and toward respect that was earned in silence. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments what part spoke to you the most. The moral of this story isn't about wealth or power or public vindication. It's about the quiet revolution that happens when a woman stops seeking permission to be everything she already is. When she trades the exhausting performance of small for the peaceful certainty of whole. Because in the end, the greatest victory isn't making someone regret losing you. It's reaching a place where their opinion of you becomes irrelevant noise in the symphony of your own becoming. And if you thought this one was powerful, wait till you hear the next story we're working on. A tale about a grandmother's secret that changed 3 generations. You won't want to miss it. Sometimes the people who try to dim your light are just revealing that they've been living in darkness all along. And sometimes, the greatest kindness you can offer them is to let them stay there while you walk into the sun.